London, February 1972. A conference room on the third floor of a record label building in Soho. What happened in that room over the next 17 minutes would either destroy David Bowie's career before it truly began, or rewrite the entire music industry forever. Nobody knew which, not even Bowie himself. Now, I'm going to tell you a story you've never heard. A story about the moment one man's refusal to compromise didn't just save his career, it obliterated the career of the executive who tried to break him. But to understand what happened in that room, you need to understand where Bowie was standing when he walked through that door. David Bowie was broke. Not struggling artist broke, actually broke. His previous album had flopped. His management was losing faith. His marriage was strained. He was 24 years old and had been chasing success for nearly a decade, changing styles, changing sounds, changing everything about himself except the one thing he refused to change: his refusal to be normal. By late 1971, he had written something different, something radical, a concept album about an androgynous alien rock star named Ziggy Stardust, who becomes a messenger for extraterrestrial beings in humanity's final 5 years. The music was raw, sexual, theatrical, dangerous, and absolutely unprecedented. When Bowie's manager, Tony DeFries, began shopping the demos, the response was complicated. Some executives heard genius, others heard commercial suicide. One label head reportedly said, "This is either the future of rock and roll or the end of his career. I honestly can't tell which." But there was interest, real interest. And that's how David Bowie ended up sitting across from Roger Thornton, Senior Vice President of Artist Development at one of Britain's largest record labels, on a cold February morning in 1972. What nobody in that room knew, what Bowie himself didn't fully realize, was that Thornton had already made up his mind before Bowie walked through the door. He was going to break David Bowie, or save him, depending on your perspective. The meeting started normally enough. 5 people in the room: Bowie, his manager DeFries, Thornton, and 2 junior executives whose names would later be lost to history. The kind of people who sit in meetings nodding at whatever the most powerful person says. Bowie was dressed, as he often was in those days, in clothing that blurred every line society had drawn. His hair was long, dyed a striking reddish-orange. His shirt was open. His manner was polite but distant, the way someone behaves when they're used to not being taken seriously. Thornton was in his early 50s, gray suit, conservative tie, the kind of man who'd built a career on understanding what sold and what didn't. He'd signed successful acts. He knew the formula. The demo tape played. Thornton listened without expression. When it finished, silence filled the room like smoke. Then Thornton spoke. "It's interesting," he said, which, in the language of record executives, meant absolutely nothing. Bowie waited. "The production is solid. The songwriting shows promise. You clearly have talent." A pause. "But we need to talk about marketability." And there it was, the word that had haunted Bowie's entire career: marketability. The industry's favorite weapon against anything that didn't fit into neat, pre-existing categories. DeFries shifted in his seat. He'd heard this before. Thornton leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "David, let me be direct with you. You're a talented musician, But the image you're presenting, the theatricality, the androgyny, the ambiguity, it's not going to work in the mainstream market." Bowie said nothing. His face remained perfectly neutral. "Radio stations won't touch it, retailers won't stock it, parents will keep their kids away from it, and frankly," Thornton gestured vaguely at Bowie's appearance, "you need to tone down the gay stuff." One of the junior executives looked down at his notepad. "I'm not gay," Bowie said quietly. "I'm not saying you are," Thornton replied too quickly. "But that's what people will think. And perception is reality in this business." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of other successful rock artists, all men, all with relatively conventional appearances. "These artists sell millions of records. They're on television. They're respected. And they all understand that success requires compromise." Bowie looked at the photographs without touching them. Thornton continued, "Here's what we need. Cut your hair. Dress like a normal rock musician. Jeans, t-shirts, nothing too flamboyant. Do interviews where you talk about your wife, your normal life. We'll position you as a serious artist, not a spectacle." The word hung in the air like an insult. "We're offering you a real shot here, David, a 3-album deal with full promotional support. But we need you to meet us halfway. We need you to be marketable." Dufries started to speak, but Bowie raised one hand slightly. The room waited. Outside, London traffic hummed. A phone rang somewhere down the hall. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary world. But inside that conference room, something extraordinary was about to happen. David Bowie stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, just stood up, like someone who'd suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. "Thank you for your time," Bowie said. Thornton blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I'm not interested." The junior executives exchanged glances. This wasn't how these meetings went. Artists didn't turn down major label deals, especially not struggling artists who desperately needed one. Thornton's expression shifted from confusion to something harder. "David, I don't think you understand what you're walking away from." "I understand perfectly." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been trying to make it in this industry for how long? 8 years? 9? And you've got nothing to show for it except failed singles and empty bank accounts." Bowie's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "That's true. So what exactly do you think is going to happen if you walk out of here? You think some other label is going to let you prance around in makeup and dresses? You think radio stations are suddenly going to change their programming for you?" "I don't know what's going to happen," Bowie said, "but I know what I'm not going to do." "And what's that?" Bowie looked directly at Thornton. "I'm not going to cut my hair and pretend to be someone I'm not so you can feel comfortable selling me." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Thornton sat back in his chair, his expression darkening. "Let me tell you something about this industry, David. It doesn't reward stubbornness. It doesn't celebrate artists who refuse to play the game. You walk out of here, and I personally guarantee you, that you'll never work with a major label again." "Then I won't work with a major label." "You think you can make it independently? You think you have the resources, the connections, the distribution network to compete with established artists?" "I don't know," Bowie said again, but I'd rather fail as myself than succeed as someone you want me to be." The words landed like a bomb. DeFries quickly gathered his papers. He could see where this was going, and he knew better than to try to salvage it. But Thornton wasn't finished. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said, his voice low and cold. "And when you're broke and forgotten in a year, when you're playing pub gigs for beer money, remember that I offered you everything. And you threw it away because you were too proud to compromise." Bowie moved toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back to Thornton. "You're right about one thing," Bowie said. "This industry doesn't reward stubbornness. It rewards conformity. It rewards people who are willing to sand down every interesting edge until they're smooth and safe and forgettable." He paused. "But you're wrong about something else. You think you're offering me everything. You're not. You're offering me a version of success that requires me to kill the most interesting parts of myself. And that's not everything. That's nothing." He walked out. DeFries followed. The door closed. Inside the conference room, nobody spoke for 30 seconds. Then Thornton said, to no one in particular, "His career is over." One of the junior executives cleared his throat. Should we call other labels? Warn them that he's difficult?" Thornton smiled. "Not warmly. We don't need to. Word travels fast in this industry. By tomorrow, everyone will know that David Bowie turned down a major deal because he refused to look normal. No one's going to touch him." "What if he tries to go independent?" Thornton laughed. Actually laughed. "With what money? With what distribution? He'll put out some vanity project that sells 3,000 copies, realize he can't pay his bills, and come crawling back. And when he does, the offer will be half of what I just gave him." The meeting adjourned. Thornton went to lunch with colleagues and told the story as an amusing anecdote about artist arrogance. How a nobody with no hits and no money had turned down salvation because he wanted to wear glitter. Everyone laughed. The industry moved on. But something had changed. Something Roger Thornton didn't see coming. 3 months later, Starman entered the UK charts, not through Thornton's label, through RCA Records, who'd signed Bowie after hearing what happened in that meeting. They didn't want him to compromise. They wanted him exactly as he was, strange, sexual, challenging, dangerous. By June 1972, Bowie performed Starman on Top of the Pops, Britain's most-watched music show. He wore a multicolored jumpsuit, his arm draped around guitarist Mick Ronson's shoulder. His performance was electric, androgynous, revolutionary. The performance was seen by 15 million people. Overnight, everything changed. Teenage kids who'd felt different, strange, wrong. They saw someone on television who was different and proud of it, someone who hadn't compromised, someone who'd been told to be normal and had said no. The album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars was released in June 1972. It wasn't an immediate chart topper, but it was something more important. It was a cultural earthquake. Music journalists called it groundbreaking. Radio stations that had initially resisted started playing it. Young people didn't just buy the album. They adopted Ziggy as an identity. They dyed their hair. They wore platform boots. They found permission to be weird. Within a year, Bowie was one of the biggest rock stars in the world, not because he'd compromised, because he hadn't. Back at the label, Roger Thornton watched it happen. At first, he dismissed it. A fluke. A novelty act that would fade when the shock value wore off. Then, Bowie's second single charted. Then his third. Then Bowie appeared on magazine covers. Then he sold out concert halls across Britain. Then America took notice. Thornton's colleagues began asking questions. Quiet questions at first, then louder ones. Didn't we meet with Bowie? Didn't we have a chance to sign him? What happened in that meeting? The story got out. It always does. The story of how Roger Thornton, Senior Vice President of Artist Development, had demanded that David Bowie cut his hair and act normal. How Bowie had walked out. How Thornton had promised Bowie would never work again. And how Bowie had become one of the most important artists of the decade anyway. By autumn 1972, the label's board was asking uncomfortable questions. They'd missed the biggest signing opportunity in years because of one executive's inability to see past conventional thinking. Thornton tried to defend himself. "Nobody could have predicted this," he said. "The market research showed—" "The market research was wrong," a board member interrupted. "And you let your personal discomfort with his image blind you to his talent." It wasn't personal discomfort, it was professional judgment. Professional judgment that cost this company millions. Other artists signed to the label started taking notice. If Thornton had been that wrong about Bowie, what else was he wrong about? Some began requesting meetings without Thornton present. Others started questioning his creative direction. In January 1973, Roger Thornton was quietly removed from his position. The official statement said he was pursuing other opportunities. The reality was that he'd been fired. His reputation in the industry, built over decades, had been irreparably damaged by one spectacularly bad decision. Other labels remembered. When Thornton applied for new positions, the conversation always came around to the same question. "Weren't you the one who turned down David Bowie?" He'd try to explain, try to provide context, try to make them understand that nobody could have known, that the conventional wisdom at the time was. But the damage was done. By 1975, Thornton had left the music industry entirely. David Bowie, meanwhile, released Young Americans. Then, Station to Station, then Low. Each album different, each album challenging, each album proof that the most interesting art comes from people who refuse to compromise the interesting parts of themselves. In 1983, over a decade after that meeting, a journalist tracked down Roger Thornton for an interview. Thornton, now working in insurance, initially refused to comment, but eventually he agreed to talk. "Do you regret what you said to David Bowie?" the journalist asked. Thornton was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," he finally said, "but not for the reason you think." "What do you mean?" "I regret it because I was wrong about the market. I was wrong about what people wanted. I was wrong about everything. But more than that," Thornton paused. "I regret it because I told a young artist that the most interesting thing about him was the thing he needed to hide. And that's unforgivable." The journalist pressed, "If you could go back to that meeting, what would you say differently?" Thornton smiled sadly. "I'd say, don't change a thing. The world needs to see exactly who you are. Do you think Bowie would have been as successful if you'd signed him under your terms?" "No," Thornton said immediately. "Absolutely not. Because what made him successful wasn't just the music. It was the bravery, the refusal to compromise. If I had gotten him to cut his hair and tone it down, I'd have killed the thing that made him special. I'd have created just another rock musician in a world full of rock musicians. Do you think he knew that when he walked out? Thornton considered this. I don't think he knew he'd become David Bowie, but I think he knew that being himself, even if he failed, was better than succeeding as someone else's idea of what he should be. The interview ended. Thornton died in 1997. His obituary mentioned his long career in the music industry. It did not mention David Bowie. Bowie died in 2016, just days after releasing his final album, Black Star. He'd spent 44 years making exactly the music he wanted to make, looking exactly how he wanted to look, being exactly who he wanted to be. It's not just that Bowie was brave, though he was. It's not just that Thornton was wrong, though he was. It's this: the people who tell you to compromise, to tone it down, to be more marketable. They genuinely believe they're helping you. They're not villains. They're people operating from conventional wisdom, from market research, from everything that has worked before. But conventional wisdom is always about the past. It's about what succeeded yesterday, not what will matter tomorrow. The truth is that every genuinely important artist, innovator, or creator has faced their own version of that conference room. Someone in a position of power telling them to sand down their edges, to be more normal, to fit into an existing category. And the ones we remember, the ones who actually change things, are the ones who said no. Not because they were certain they'd succeed, but because they were certain that succeeding on someone else's terms wasn't actually success at all. David Bowie walked into that meeting as a struggling musician with everything to lose. He walked out as someone who decided that his integrity was more valuable than a contract. 17 minutes. One decision, and the world never looked at rock music, or identity, or art, or self-expression the same way again. Roger Thornton thought he was protecting the label from a risky investment. What he was actually doing was protecting the world from ever knowing who David Bowie really was. And thank God David Bowie didn't let him.